You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens. With graphic details right from the start of this episode, listener discretion is advised. So it's over to you now, Mark.
Sylvia Marie Likens was an American teenager from Indiana who, during the 1960s, was tortured and murdered by her caregiver, Gertrude Baniszewski, along with Baniszewski's own children and many of her children's friends. Sylvia Likens was increasingly tormented, neglected, belittled, sexually humiliated, beaten, starved, lacerated, burned and dehydrated by her tormentors. The abuse lasted for 3 months until on the 26th of October 1965, Sylvia Likens died from her extensive injuries and malnourishment. Her autopsy showed there were 150 wounds across her body, including several burns, scald marks and eroded skin. The official cause of Sylvia Likens' death was determined to be a homicide caused by a combination of subdural hematoma and shock, complicated by severe malnutrition. The torture and murder of Sylvia Likens is widely regarded by Indiana citizens as the worst crime ever committed in their state. So, on the 30th of December 1965, the Marion County Grand Jury returned with a guilty verdict of first-degree murder against Gertrude Baniszewski and 2 of her 3 eldest children. The case was described by a senior investigator on the Indianapolis Police Department as the most sadistic case that he had ever investigated in the 35 years that he had served with law enforcement. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this sad and distressing episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm a psychic medium, a ufologist and a true crime buff. And just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every Monday night I do a podcast on the various subjects under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters and all sorts of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime and missing people. So if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the torture and murder of Sylvia Likens, and this week's necessary disclaimer. This story is a tale that sadly involves themes of child abuse, torture and murder, in particular to a minor, so may prove upsetting to some. You listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case still remain. I also apologise again if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My use of the English language, if anything, is unique. Anyway, back we go to the story. Sylvia Likens was born on the 3rd of January 1949 and was the third of 5 children born to carnival workers Lester Cecil Likens and his wife Elizabeth Likens. Sylvia Likens was born between 2 sets of fraternal twins, Danielle and Diana, who were 2 years older than her, and Benny and Jenny, who were 1 year younger. Unfortunately, one of the younger twins, Jenny Likens, suffered from polio, causing one of her legs to be weaker than the other, so she had a notable limp and consequently had to wear a steel brace on one leg. Lester and Elizabeth Likens' marriage was often very unstable and regularly experienced severe financial difficulties. So, to make money, they often sold candy, beer and soda at carnival stands around Indiana throughout the summer, moving very frequently as they did so. The Likens' sons, Daniel and Benny, regularly travelled with the family in order to assist with the carnival stand, but Sylvia Likens and her sister Jenny were discouraged from doing the same, mainly out of concern for their safety and their education. So, as a result, both of the sisters, Sylvia and Jenny, used to stay with some relatives, often their grandmother. Sylvia Likens, in her teenage years, occasionally earned some spending money by babysitting locally, running various errands or doing ironing chores for friends and neighbours. And because she was a girl with a big heart, she often gave her mother part of her earnings. Her friends would describe Sylvia Likens overall as a friendly, confident, lively girl with long and wavy light brown hair that extended below her shoulders. And, to her friends, she often went by the nickname of Cookie. And although Sylvia Likens was an animated and cheerful young lady, she tended to always smile with her mouth closed. This was due mainly to a missing front tooth, which she had lost while playing a little bit of rough and tumble with one of her brothers during a childhood game. Sylvia Likens was also very fond of music, with having a particular interest in the sound of the Beatles. She was also, notably, very protective of her timid and more insecure younger sister Jenny, who, as I mentioned earlier, suffered from polio. The two sisters, Sylvia and Jenny, would occasionally visit a local skating rink where Sylvia would help Jenny skate by holding her hand while Jenny skated on her unaffected foot. By the June of 1965, the two sisters, Sylvia and Jenny Likens, resided with their parents in Indianapolis. However, later that same year, on the 3rd of July, their mother, Elizabeth Likens, was arrested for shoplifting and subsequently jailed. This meant that shortly after the arrest, the girl's father, Lester Likens, had to arrange for his daughters to board with a carer named Gertrude Baniszewski, who was also the mother of two daughters named Poolar and Stephanie Baniszewski, with whom Sylvia and Jenny Likens had recently become acquainted with while studying at the Arsenal Technical High School in Indianapolis. At the time of this boarding arrangement between Lester Likens and Gertrude Baniszewski, she assured him that she would take care of his daughters as if they were her own children until he returned. So, shortly after the 4th of July holiday, the two sisters, Sylvia and Jenny Likens, moved into 3850 East New York Street in order for their father, Lester, and, at a later date, their mother, Elizabeth, were able to travel to the East Coast with the carnival, on the understanding that the girl's carer, Gertrude Baniszewski, would receive a weekly boarding fee of $20 to care for their daughters until they returned to collect Sylvia and Jenny in the November of that same year of 1965. During the first few weeks in which Sylvia and Jenny Likens resided at the Baniszewski home, the two sisters were subjected to very little discipline or abuse. Sylvia Likens regularly sang along to 1960s pop records with one of the Baniszewski's sisters, and willingly participated in all the housework and chores at the residence. Also, both girls regularly attended Sunday school with the Baniszewski children, with the church pastor even commending Sylvia Likens' religiosity. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at some of the backstory of the carer Gertrude Baniszewski and the start of the terrible abuse that Sylvia Likens endured.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only £3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
So, who was Gertrude Baniszewski? Well, Gertrude Nadine Baniszewski was born in Indianapolis, Indiana, on the 19th of September 1928 to parents of English and Dutch descent, Hugh Marcus Van Fossum Sr. and Molly Myrtle, both of whom were originally from Illinois in the Midwestern region of the United States. Gertrude Baniszewski was from a working-class family, being the third of 6 children, and on the 5th of October 1939 she saw her 50-year-old father, Hugh Marcus Van Vossen Sr., die from a sudden heart attack. 6 years later, after her father's death, Gertrude Baniszewski, at the tender age of just 16 years old, decided to drop out of high school and marry an 18-year-old man named John Baniszewski, who was of Polish ancestry and originally came from the Youngville, Pennsylvania. Her and John Baniszewski later had 4 children of their own. And although John Baniszewski had a volatile temper and occasionally beat his wife, the couple remained together for 10 years prior to their first divorce. Note that I said first divorce. Following her divorce, Gertrude Baniszewski then married a second man named Edward Guthrie. However, this marriage only lasted 3 months before they also separated and also got divorced. And then, shortly after this second divorce, Gertrude Baniszewski remarried her first husband, John Baniszewski, again, and had 2 more children, making 6, and then promptly divorced again for the second time in 1963. A few weeks later, or a few weeks after her third divorce, Gertrude Baniszewski began a relationship with a man named Dennis Lee Wright, who was a 20-year-old welder who was physically abused to her. Blimey, she didn't half pick him, didn't she? Gertrude Baniszewski and Dennis Lee Wright had one child, a son, that they decided to call Dennis Lee Wright Jr. However, shortly after the birth of Dennis Lee Wright Jr. In the May of 1964, Dennis Wright abandoned Gertrude Baniszewski, leaving her to fend for her ever-growing family on her own. She did file a paternity suit against him for financial support of their only son, but Dennis Wright very rarely contributed anything to help care for the child. So, by 1965, Gertrude Baniszewski was living alone at 3850 East New York Street in Indianapolis with her 7 children. Poolar, age 17, Stephanie, age 15, John, age 12, Marie, aged 11, Shirley, age 10, James, age 8, and 1-year-old Dennis Lee Wright Jr. And although she was only 36 years old, she had been described as a, and I quote,
haggard, underweight, asthmatic.
She was also described as a chain smoker who suffered from clinical depression due to the stress of 3 failed marriages, a failed relationship and, apparently, a recent miscarriage. But in addition to the sporadic checks she received from her first husband, who, if you remember, of course, was her third husband as well, keep up people, there was a former Indianapolis policeman whom she primarily relied upon for some financial support for her children. And not only that, but Gertrude Baniszewski occasionally performed odd jobs for neighbours and acquaintances like sewing or cleaning, so she could earn some extra money, as the rent for where she resided was $55 a month, which was quite a lot back then. Although Sylvia's father, Lester Likens, had agreed to pay Gertrude Baniszewski $20 a week for looking after both of his daughters, so that he and Sylvia's mother, Elizabeth, could travel over to the East Coast with the carnival, after a couple of weeks, these payments consistently failed to arrive on the pre-arranged dates, occasionally arriving at least 1 or 2 days late. So, in response to these late payments, Gertrude Baniszewski thought it was a good idea to start venting her frustration about the late payments upon the 2 sisters, Sylvia and Jenny Likens, by beating their bare buttocks with various instruments, such as a 1/4 inch thick paddle, making various statements such as, and I quote,
"Well, I took care of you 2 little bitches for a week for nothing."
And on one occasion, in the early August of 1965, both the girls were beaten approximately 15 times each on their backs with the aforementioned 1/4 inch thick paddle, after 17-year-old Paula Baniszewski had accused both Sylvia and Jenny Likens of eating too much food at the church supper that the household children had attended earlier on that same day. By the mid-August, Gertrude Baniszewski had begun to focus her cruelty and abuse almost exclusively upon the then 16-year-old Sylvia Likens. It had been theorised that Gertrude Baniszewski's primary motivation for singling out Sylvia Likens was probably down to things like being jealous of the girl's youth, appearance, respectability, and potential. The initial abuse that Sylvia Likens was subjected to included things like beatings, starvation, forcing to eat leftovers, and even forcing her to eat spoiled food out of a garbage can. On one occasion, as the family ate supper, Gertrude Baniszewski and her 17-year-old daughter, Paula, along with one of the other neighbourhood boys, decided to force-feed Sylvia Likens a hot dog that was overloaded with condiments, included mustard, ketchup, and various other spices. And Because of this force feeding, Sylvia Likens then vomited the contents onto the floor. However, the bullying didn't stop there, because she was then forced to consume what she had just regurgitated. On another occasion, 17-year-old Poolar Baniszewski, for whatever reason, beat Sylvia Likens about the face with such a force that she ended up breaking her own wrist, having primarily focused her blows upon Sylvia Likens' teeth and eyes, and, at a later date, Poolar then decided to finish the job off that she had started and used the cast, whilst it was still on her own wrist, to beat Sylvia Likens some more. Gertrude Baniszewski would also continuously and falsely accuse Sylvia Likens of promiscuity and of engaging in prostitution by ranting about the filthiness of it and of other women in general. Gertrude Baniszewski would also occasionally force Sylvia's younger sibling, Jenny Likens, to strike her own sister by threatening to beat Jenny if she did not comply. To be honest with you listeners, the list of things that this poor young girl was put through were abhorrent, evil and sadistic. Some of the things are so detestable and horrific that I can't even describe them on this episode without myself, getting angry about it. And not only that, but I'm not even sure I could get it past the YouTube police bots. So, if you do want to know more about the sadistic torture that 16-year-old Sylvia Likens had to endure, it's probably best to check out some of the true crime websites that are available on this case. But I warn you, it is disturbing reading. So what I'm going to do is fast forward a few weeks to the time when the abuse was being flagged to other members of the family and friends. Sylvia Likens' younger sister, Jenny, who, if you remembered, suffered from polio, which caused one of her legs to be weaker than the other, was too scared to notify any family members or other adults of the domestic turmoil and abuse that her elder sister was going through. In fact, both of the girls were afraid of reporting the abuse, mainly out of fear or further worsening their domestic situation. In the July and August of 1965, both Sylvia and Jenny's parents, Lester and Elizabeth Likens, would occasionally return to Indianapolis to visit their daughters, with the last visit being on the 5th of October of that same year, 1965. However, on this particular visit on the 5th of October, neither Sylvia nor Jenny exhibited any visible signs of distress about their mistreatment from Gertrude Baniszewski and her family to their parents. But almost immediately after Lester and Elizabeth had left the Baniszewski household on this final visit, Gertrude Baniszewski turned to face Sylvia Likens and said, and I quote,
"What are you going to do now, Sylvia, now they're gone?"
After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at some of the missed opportunities to help Sylvia Likens escape her abuse and the trial and punishment of Gertrude Baniszewski and the other members of the family.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
On one occasion, in the September of 1965, whilst the sisters were still living at the Baniszewski home, both Sylvia and Jenny encountered their older sister, Diana Shoemaker, at a local park. Both sisters informed Diana about the abuse that they were enduring at the hands of Gertrude Baniszewski and her members of her family, adding that Sylvia was being specifically targeted for physical abuse. However, their eldest sister, Diana, felt that her younger sisters must be over-exaggerating their claims regarding the scope of their mistreatment. One of the many abhorrent mistreatments that Sylvia Likens was subjected to was a punishment called the scalding bath. And, according to sources, Sylvia Likens was given this treatment, or mistreatment, in order to cleanse her of any sin, with Gertrude Baniszewski grabbing Sylvia's hair and repeatedly banging her head against the bath to revive her whenever she passed out through the pain of the scalding water. And shortly after one of these scalding bath incidents, one of the fathers of a neighbourhood boy phoned the Arsenal Technical High School, the school where Sylvia attended, to anonymously report that a girl with open sores across her entire body was living at the Baniszewski's household, and as Sylvia Likens had not attended the school for the last few days, a school nurse was sent to visit Gertrude Baniszewski's home to investigate these claims. Once there, Gertrude Baniszewski explained to the school nurse that Sylvia Likens had run away from her home the previous week and that she was unaware of her actual whereabouts. She also told the school nurse that Sylvia Likens was, and I quote,
out of control,
and that the open sores on her body were probably the result of Sylvia's refusal to maintain decent personal hygiene, claiming further that the young Likens girl was a bad influence on both her own children and her younger sister Jenny. So, the school, in its own wisdom, decided to make no further investigations concerning Sylvia Likens' welfare. Sound familiar? On or about the 1st of October, the girl's older sister, Diana Shoemaker, decided that she would visit the Baniszewski home to try to initiate some regular contact with her younger siblings. However, Gertrude Baniszewski was having none of it and refused to allow Diana entry to the property, stating that she had received orders from her parents not to allow either of the girls to see her. And 2 weeks later, outside by chance, Diana Shoemaker encountered one of her younger sisters, Jenny Likens, and she inquired as to Sylvia's welfare. But she was told by Jenny, and I quote,
I can't tell you or I'll get into trouble.
Due to the increased frequency, brutality, torture and mistreatment that Sylvia Likens was subjected to, she gradually became incontinent. However, on top of everything else, she was denied any access to the bathroom, which meant she was forced to constantly wet herself. And as a form of punishment for her incompetence, on the 6th of October, Gertrude Baniszewski, being the sick, twisted psychopath that she was, thought it would be a good idea to throw Sylvia Likens literally down into the basement and tie her up, where she was often kept naked, rarely fed, and frequently deprived of water. On the 25th of October, Sylvia Likens attempted to escape from the basement after overhearing a conversation between Gertrude Baniszewski and her 12-year-old son John Baniszewski Jr. pertaining to a family's plan to abandon her and let her die. Sylvia attempted to flee through the front door, but unfortunately, due to her extensive injuries and general weakness, Gertrude Baniszewski caught her before she could escape the property, and then dragged her back down into the basement. That same evening, Sylvia Likens desperately attempted to alert neighbours by screaming for help and hitting the walls of the basement with a spade. One immediate neighbour of the Baniszewskis claimed that they had heard the desperate commotion and that she had identified the source as emanating from the basement of the Baniszewskis' residence. But as the noise had suddenly ceased at approximately 3 a.m, she decided not to inform the police about the disturbance. By the next morning, on the 26th of October, Sylvia Likens, due to her frailty, was unable to speak clearly or correctly coordinate the movements of her limbs. Then, for whatever reason, although I like to think out of some sort of guilt, 15-year-old Stephanie Baniszewski and one of the other neighbourhood children, upon seeing Sylvia's physical condition, decided to give her a warm, soapy bath, dress her in new clothes, and then lay her upon a mattress in one of the bedrooms. As the two children did this, Sylvia Likens then whispered her final wish, and that was that her, and I quote,
Daddy was here.
and that Stephanie Baniszewski would take her home. When Stephanie Baniszewski realised that Sylvia Likens was not breathing, she attempted to apply mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. However, this procedure was constantly harassed by the incessant shouting from Gertrude Baniszewski, who continuously repeated the words about Sylvia Likens, and I quote,
She's faking her death. Faking it, I tell you.
Sylvia Likens was just 16 years old when she finally succumbed to her many injuries. Gertrude Baniszewski, who is a complete excuse for a fucking shit stain and a total psychopath, decided to keep striking the corpse of Sylvia Likens with a book, shouting the word, and I quote,
Faker. Faker.
in what could only be a final, feeble and pathetic attempt to try to wake her up and control her. However, panic soon set in when she realised that Sylvia Likens was in fact dead, so she instructed one of the neighbourhood children to call the police from a nearby payphone. When the police arrived at the Baniszewski address at approximately 6:30 p.m. that same day, Gertrude led the police officers to Sylvia Likens' emaciated, extensively bludgeoned and mutilated body that was lying upon a soiled mattress in the bedroom. Gertrude Baniszewski then handed the constables a letter that she had previously forced Sylvia Likens to write at some point earlier during her care by her so-called carer's dictation. Her younger sister, Jenny Likens, then, I should imagine, under the threat of the pain of death from Gertrude, recited the rehearsed version of events leading to her sister, Sylvia Likens' death to the police. She then, making sure that she was out of earshot from the Baniszewski family, whispered to the police officers, and I quote,
"You get me out of here and I'll tell you everything."
After the police heard the formal statement provided by Jenny Likens, the officers then, within hours of the discovery of Sylvia's body, promptly arrested Gertrude Baniszewski and 3 of her children, 17-year-old Poolar, 15-year-old Stephanie and 12-year-old John Baniszewski Jr. on suspicion of Sylvia Likens' murder. And also on the same day, 2 of the local children, one Coy Hubbard and Richard Hobbs, were also arrested and charged with the same offences. The 3 eldest Baniszewski children, along with Coy Hubbard, were placed in the custody of a nearby juvenile detention centre, with the younger Baniszewski children, along with Richard Hobbs, being detained at the Indianapolis Children's Guardians Home. All suspects were being held without bail pending trial. Initially, during questioning, Gertrude Baniszewski denied any involvement with the Sylvia Likens death. However, by the 27th of October, while still under questioning, Gertrude had confessed to having known her kids, particularly her daughter, 17-year-old Poolar, and a neighbourhood boy called Coy Hubbard, had physically and emotionally abused Sylvia Likens, stating that, and I quote,
"Paula did most of the damage."
She continued, and again I quote,
"And Coy Hubbard did a lot of the beating."
Honour amongst thieves, eh? Gertrude Baniszewski further told the police that she had to force Sylvia Likens to sleep in the basement on approximately 3 occasions, but only when she had wet the bed. However, Gertrude became evasive when one of the officers stated that the likely reasons Sylvia Likens had become incontinent were due to her mental distress and the injuries to her kidneys. I think it's worth pointing out here that, along with the aforementioned arrests, there were 5 other neighbourhood local children who had participated in Sylvia Likens' abuse. They were Michael Monroe, Randy Lepper, Darlene Maguire, Judy Duke and Anna Sisko. These, dare I say, children had also been arrested by the 29th of October. They were all charged with causing injury to a person, and each was subsequently released into the custody of their parents under subpoena to appear as witnesses at the upcoming trial. The autopsy of Sylvia Likens' body revealed that she had suffered in excess of 150 separate wounds across her entire frame. In addition to being extremely emaciated or showing severe signs of starvation at the time of her death, with the wounds themselves varying in location, nature, severity, and all in various stages of healing. Her injuries included burns, severe bruising, and extensive muscle and nerve damage, with her vaginal cavity almost swollen shut. And on top of all that, Sylvia's fingernails were broken backwards, and most of her external layers of skin upon her face, breasts and neck, and right knee had peeled away or receded. And it also appeared that the 16-year-old had evidently bitten through her lips, partially severing sections of them from her face. The official cause of Sylvia Likens' death was listed by the coroner, a Dr. Arthur Keble, as a subdural hematoma, due to her receiving a severe blow to the right temple. Dr. Arthur Keble also stated that both the shock she had primarily suffered due to the severe and prolonged damage inflicted to her skin and subcutaneous tissues, plus the severe malnutrition, were listed as contributory factors to Sylvia's death. The trial of the 5 defendants, which included Gertrude, 17-year-old Poolar and 12-year-old John Baniszewski Jr., along with 2 of the neighbourhood children, Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard, lasted for 17 days before the jury retired to consider its verdict. And on the 19th of May 1966, after deliberating for just 8 hours, the panel of 8 men and 4 women found Gertrude Baniszewski guilty of first-degree murder, recommending a sentence of life imprisonment. And her daughter, 17-year-old Paula Baniszewski, was found guilty of second-degree murder, with Richard Hobbs, Coy Hubbard and John Baniszewski Jr. being found guilty of manslaughter. On the 25th of May that same year, Gertrude Baniszewski and her 17-year-old daughter Paula were formally sentenced to life imprisonment. And on that same day, the 2 neighbourhood boys, Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard, along with 12-year-old John Baniszewski Jr., each received sentences of 2 to 21 years to be served in the Indiana Reformatory. The funeral service for Sylvia Likens was conducted on the afternoon of the 29th of October at the Russell and Hitch Funeral Home in Lebanon, in the seat of the Boone County, Indiana. The service itself was officiated by the Reverend Louis Gibson, with more than 100 mourners in attendance. Sylvia Likens' grey casket remained open throughout the ceremony, with a portrait of her taken prior to July of 1965 adorning her coffin. Following Reverend Louis Gibson's moving service, Sylvia Likens' casket was placed by pallbearers in a hearse and driven to the Oak Hill Cemetery, again in Lebanon, to be interred. This hearse was one of a 14-vehicle procession to drive to Oak Hill Cemetery for Sylvia's burial, with the inscription on her headstone reading, and I quote,
"Our darling daughter."
In the June of 2001, a 6-foot-tall granite memorial was formally dedicated to Sylvia Likens' life and legacy in Willard Park, Washington Street, Indianapolis. This dedication was attended by several hundred people, including members of the Likens family. The memorial itself is inscribed with these words, and I quote,
"This memorial is in memory of a young child who died a tragic death. As a result, laws changed and awareness increased. This is a commitment to our children that the Indianapolis Police Department is working to make this a safe city for our children." Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 119, we are going to be looking at I should have read this beforehand. Oikigahara.
Oikigahara.
Say it again.
Oikigahara.
That one, the suicide forest.
Oikigahara
is also known as the Sea of Trees. It's a forest on the northwestern flank of Mount Fuji on the island of Honshu in Japan. The forest has a historical reputation as a home to ghosts of the dead in Japanese mythology.
Oikigahara
has also become associated with suicide, eventually becoming known in English by the nickname the Suicide Forest, and gaining a reputation as one of the world's most used suicide sites.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations of all the names bar Akagagora was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast. But if you know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters, and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I will see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast as a thank you. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third eye. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. This show and all its contents are covered by the basic copyright of Mark the Medium.